When it comes to Metal Gear Solid, it's almost impossible for me to speak about this game objectively. There's just no way for me to surgically remove the rose-tinted glasses that were put on my face when I was a teenager when this game entered my life. So in this video, we're going to talk about some of the things that I think make Metal Gear Solid so timeless. Now, we're talking only about Metal Gear Solid 1, not the entire series. And don't forget, you can hop around this video's chapters in the description below. Like I said, talking about this game is not something I can do objectively, but what I can do is share what I like about certain aspects of this game. What really made it stand out to me amongst the other games at the time. So to kick things off, let's talk about the art in Metal Gear Solid. And I'm speaking specifically about the art within the game, not the concept art, which is also amazing. Just want to focus on the actual game's art. At the time, there weren't that many references to cel-shaded games. Things are still getting sussed out with the PlayStation and what it can do, because 3D gaming was beginning to become a mainstay. It wasn't exactly new, but it wasn't exactly old yet either. So different art styles were popping up, and Metal Gear Solid's art style stood out to me so much. It looks hand-drawn, it looks like it was done with marker, and granted, the polygons are almost unforgivably visible. They look good, it looks crispy, it looks kind of retro, but that is because this game is now, I suppose, considered retro. Even at the time, it was clear that this game wasn't going for the smooth polygon graphical look. It was going for something a little more gritty and hand-drawn, and at least to me, that spoke to the entire game. It added this level of detail and texture. It was almost as though you can go in there and touch the things that were on the screen. Not because it looked realistic, but because it looked tactile. It looked so gritty, and I think that really helped bring the game to life. It was also one of the first games that I ever played that features in-gameplay cinematics, games that didn't cut away to like a CGI cinematic, one that took place within the game's world, stories that were told from the characters who you would then control. And something about that made the entire thing feel like one big experience. It didn't give me this glimpse into what graphics would be. I feel as though Final Fantasy VII had this problem where you would see the blocky characters on one side, but then you would see slightly better, more smooth CGI versions of them in the cinematics. So Metal Gear Solid goes ahead and tells its story from within the same world that you would then be choking out a guard. And I thought that was really good. I thought it was a great way to make it all feel like one cohesive experience. Metal Gear Solid does show its age with this, however, because clearly this is way before we had moving mouths in cinematics, so the characters would sort of just nod their head when they would speak. And again, I can't see past this, but I'm sure it looks goofy to a younger player. And so we've got these in-game cinematics, and that works just fine, but you've also got these codec conversations, which are basically transmissions that occur between the major characters of the game.
It's Snake. I'm in front of the disposal facility.
Excellent, Snake. Age hasn't slowed you down one bit.
A lot of the storytelling does take place in here, and again, the art is on full blast, and their mouths do move a little bit when they speak to give it at least a little more emotion and expression. But all of these pieces combined, the codec conversations, the in-game cinematics, all of these things summed it up to one story that felt like a world you could walk into. It just felt like a real place. Metal Gear Solid does do its best to keep things a little more believable, to make the story land with people. You know, we're not using made-up countries and nations. They're using real places, real names, real systems like, you know, governments that you're familiar with, but adding this futuristic spin like nanomachines and weird science that doesn't quite exist yet. So it takes some reality and it sprinkles a lot of science fiction on top, and to me, that is Metal Gear Solid. I mean, it feels like a military thriller, but honestly, it's more sci-fi than anything.
You fool! You've killed him! I'm sorry, sir.
His mental shielding was very strong. I could not dive into his mind.
So we've talked about the art and the storytelling to a fault, but now let's talk about probably the thing that gripped me the most, which is the gameplay itself. Specifically, the crispness of the controls for Snake. Metal Gear as a series was a top-down stealth game that premiered on the Nintendo, so it's an old series that was then revived to be on PlayStation. That being said, Metal Gear Solid uses a lot of the same aspects as the Metal Gear games did, the top-down controls specifically. We're given this view of the entire board from a top-down perspective, and Snake controls in almost a 2D sort of way. But since the game is set in a 3D world, you're able to look behind a corner and see what's around the next bend to make sure that you're not going to walk face first into a guard. So while it was a next generation experience at the time, Metal Gear Solid also did base a lot of its gameplay on what was done on the Nintendo, which I thought was really smart. It kept it very classic, it kept it very accessible in a world where soon 3D games would take over. You gotta keep in mind, people were transitioning from the 2D landscape still. It was the late 90s and we were only just getting bored of Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. We were starting to play these N64s and these Sony PlayStations. I'm starting to sound like a really old person, but I'm just saying, we were still transitioning, and honestly, I still think a lot of people are transitioning today from 2D to 3D. So they're very familiar for 2D players, but there's a lot of things that the game does do that maybe it's not easy to figure out without experimenting. For example, Snake can actually run and hold his gun out forward while running, so you can fire and shoot at the same time. So we've talked about the controls, we've talked about the art and the story of Metal Gear Solid, and I don't think I need to say this, but the music of this game is amazing as well. It sets a great tone for the things that you're about to experience. As a matter of fact, I owned the Japanese soundtrack for Metal Gear Solid. That's how into it I was. I just needed to feel the stress of an alert while I was on my way to school. I don't know, I just liked it. The music of this game introduced me to the fact that you can have serious music in video games. I mean, Final Fantasy VII was already teaching me this, but I think Metal Gear really solidified that fact for me. One thing I actually haven't talked about yet is the fact that Metal Gear Solid is also one of the first games that gave me a choice on how I can play it. What I mean by that is you can be a sneaky stealth guy, or you can be a murderous maniac and just break everybody's neck. It's up to you how you move through each area. And while there's pros and cons to either method or your preferred method, you can come up with all sorts of ways to mess with these guards, but the point remains is that you have the choice to do so. The game gives you a ton of tools, and it's up to you to decide how you use them. Maybe you're the kind of person who wants to lay down a bunch of landmines and watch guards explode, or maybe you're the kind of person who likes knocking on the wall and then running around the other way while they're distracted.
Mr. Box.
The game champions giving the player the choice of action. What will you do to get through this situation? And that's just something that really spoke to me, and it still does. I mean, Metal Gear Solid 5 does everything it can to give the player all the agency they need to get through the world. And while the story for the game is good, I'm more interested in the interactions with each character. So I understand it if you have a gripe with the story and that it doesn't make sense, but it is nice to see some of these discussions that they have and how each boss interacts with Snake, and so on and so forth. And even though the story is a bit flawed, that does not mean it's not enjoyable. Thank you very much for watching. Do me a favor and like the video if you liked it, and leave a comment about Metal Gear Solid. What are your favorite moments from the original game? Do you hate Metal Gear Solid? Do you love it? Let me know. We can talk about it. Don't forget to make sure you're subscribed, and also make sure that your notifications are turned on for my channel so that when I upload a video like this, you get to watch it as soon as possible. Thank you very much for letting me talk your ear off about Metal Gear Solid. This is something I've been doing for a very long time, and this might be the first time I've officially recorded myself talking about the game. And while I welcome every comment, I am excited to hear from folks who got into this series late, who started Metal Gear Solid in like 2010. And, you know, comparing it to other games at that time, I wonder how it holds up for those folks individually. Be safe, and I'll see you in the next video.